The slow and relentless pressure on the Ukrainian armed forces resisting the Russian summer offensive and the first arrival of F-16s in Ukraine dominate the recent Ukraine war headlines, overshadowing the much more mundane topic of Ukraine's debt repayments. Ukraine was facing a Eurobond debt payment by August 1st of this year. Failure to meet the debt repayment or restructure the payment terms would mean that Ukraine would default on its debt, making it harder to secure additional loans in the future. Ukraine would face a complication, but it wouldn't be catastrophic, as it would necessitate more direct economic payments from the West to Ukraine than they have already committed. Debt default was not going to force them out of the war. Ukraine was able to reach an agreement to avoid default, and President Zelensky signed the agreement into law this week. This issue and the settlement do add some additional speculation about pressure on Ukraine to seek an end to the war. A flurry of activity unrelated to the debt issue ties into reaching a settlement and its potential implications for the war's future. Ukraine is striving to garner international backing to secure Russia's participation in the upcoming fall 2024 peace talks. Russia's attendance is crucial to averting the international backlash that crippled the Swiss peace talks due to the absence of an invitation for Russia to attend. Unfortunately, Russia is gradually gaining ground, and they are not under any pressure to compromise at the negotiation table on objectives they can achieve on the battlefield to bolster their bargaining position. Ukraine is using the now available Western weapons to attack targets inside Russia, within certain limits, in an effort to increase the cost of the war for the Russians. The goal is to encourage them to come to the peace table. This strategy poses a risk, as the Russians are unlikely to relinquish their negotiation position over short-term casualties, and are likely to retaliate by striking back harder at Ukraine's infrastructure targets. Russia also believes that Ukraine cannot keep up the tempo once they use up their stock of long-range Western weapons. This means that Ukraine must incentivize the Russians to negotiate outside of battlefield pressure and focus on economic and financial support. That road most likely leads to China, which Ukraine Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba visited in late July. Mr. Kuleba's visit with his Chinese counterpart, Foreign Minister Wang Yi, resulted in a joint communiqué stating that Ukraine's recognition of the One China policy regarding Hong Kong and Taiwan would enable Ukraine's inclusion in the Belt and Road Initiative. Mr. Kuleba also acknowledged an openness to the Chinese-Brazilian peace initiative that they initially rejected. The supporters of the Chinese-Brazilian peace initiative see it as part of Brazil's G20 agenda in November 2024. Goodwill toward China will go a long way toward encouraging Russia to agree to peace talks. This agreement on the One China policy is in contrast to most of Ukraine's international supporters and could be a future complication. Russia has been able to weather world sanctions and keep its economy growing for the time being, but it needs Chinese support and trade to do it and to keep the war effort going. This gives China significant influence over the Russians. China has consistently supported Russia and is a reliable ally. It is reasonable to anticipate that they won't desert Russia over Ukraine. However, they appear eager to utilize their diplomatic leverage to enhance their visibility, international reputation, and influence. The aim is to avert isolation, a matter of concern given the emergence of loose alliances in the South China Sea, spearheaded by the US-led coalitions, and the ASEAN countries' cautious warnings to China about its actions against the Philippines at their recent meeting in Laos. The Chinese inclusion of Ukraine in the Belt and Road Initiative could serve as a funding mechanism for Ukraine to start rebuilding after the war is over, while also increasing China's European profile. It also holds significance in peace negotiations, given Russia's public stance that a peace agreement with Ukraine would prohibit its membership in NATO and the European Union. If Ukraine agreed to these terms, Europe would not be able to provide economic support, and China filling this role would shift the focus of rebuilding economic support away from Europe and towards a Russian ally. The Russians would find this acceptable, but Europe is unlikely to accept it. It is also doubtful that China would fully fund a Ukraine recovery to meet Ukrainian needs or desires, but it does provide negotiating options that were not available in the past. This is significant because the restructuring of the Eurobonds suggests that the debtors are anticipating an imminent end to the war. Ukraine's bondholders will accept a 37% loss in their bond values, which will save Ukraine about $12 billion in annual debt repayment. Bondholders' actions suggest an expectation of the war ending soon, but this is not a guarantee. The agreement will also allow Ukraine to re-enter the bond market when the security situation improves and reconstruction starts. The stakeholders' optimism was most likely a byproduct of their debt negotiations with the Ukrainian government, which must have given some form of assurance that there is a realistic chance for peace in the near future. In the United States, the November elections weigh on both China and Ukraine. Ukraine fears the Trump administration's pressure on all warring parties to sign a deal to end the war. While the plan lacks specific details, the former president's expressed serious intent to end the war clearly signals a departure from the current administration's policies. The Chinese are concerned because they want to avoid a Trump presidency and would like to give Biden-Harris a foreign policy win to help their election prospects. This is a double-edged sword because a Harris win will most likely mean a continuation of the alliances forming in Asia to counter China. A Trump victory is likely to cause significant economic hardship for China, particularly given their current economic situation and the anticipated slowdown in growth, as announced after the third plenum in July. The Chinese have also signaled through state media that they can better manage a Harris administration than a Trump administration. This is most likely true, as the current Biden administration's actions in the Western Pacific are largely a reaction to China's aggressive territorial claims. By simply backing off its territorial claims and being less aggressive, China can control its own destiny and manage President Harris. This would reduce tensions and slow the impetus for forming anti-Chinese alliances. This is not an option for a Trump administration, and the Chinese leadership would have to accept the economic pain of new U.S. policies or negotiate with the United States, which would involve compromises. There are also other indications that there is an attempt to reach a peace settlement, as current European Union President Viktor Orban, the Hungarian Prime Minister, has made trips to Kyiv, Moscow and Beijing shortly after he started his 6-month term presidency. The Saudi foreign minister, who has been working closely with China, also visited Kyiv for the first time, and former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson met with former President Trump to discuss Ukraine and stated positive results from the meeting. Turkey, which has been involved in attempting to restart peace talks, helped facilitate a prisoner exchange between the West and Russia. While Ukraine, Russia and Turkey deny it, speculation suggests that this prisoner exchange holds deeper significance and suggests some diplomatic activity is taking place between the two sides that is greater than a large prisoner exchange. The final issue is that the Ukrainian population in non-occupied regions has had a series of polls conducted to gauge the level of tolerance they have for continuing the war. The government did not conduct these polls, but a Kyiv-based think tank acting on its behalf did. According to the poll, Ukrainians are open to holding peace talks and making some concessions, but not making territorial concessions to Russia. This does represent a softening of the population's stance toward continuing the war, and it provides valuable guidance to Ukraine's government on whether to pursue peace terms or continue the war. There is no guarantee of peace in Ukraine, but there is a strong desire to end the war. China must find a way to persuade Russia to engage in negotiations, a task that may not be straightforward due to Russian President Vladimir Putin's potential desire to postpone any peace agreement until after the November US elections. This move could potentially deny the Biden administration a foreign policy victory that could boost its election prospects, a tactic similar to what the Iranians did to President Carter during the 1980 hostage crisis. There is also a basic question of Ukraine's security. If Ukraine agrees not to join NATO and the EU in exchange for Chinese support, what security guarantees will it receive? And will it not become a vassal of China and Russia? There are justifiable concerns about relying on the Chinese to provide the support needed to rebuild, as seen in its terms with other Belt and Road Initiative projects. While the effectiveness of negotiating all these issues in the 90 days before the US election seems doubtful, there appears to be genuine pressure to end the war, and the world can only hope for a just and lasting peace.